In the heart of Makurdi town in Benue State, Nigeria, there's a hair salon unlike any other. No mirrors on the walls. No reflections allowed. And the owner, a graceful woman everyone calls Madam Patricia, with an elegant, gifted, and strangely guarded personality. But behind her warm smile lies a secret passed down by blood, a secret that could shatter everything if ever revealed. Madam Patricia's hair salon is a salon that everyone couldn't stop talking about. It wasn't just any salon, it was the go-to place for the finest girls for the best of braids, the sleekest cuts, and hairstyles that turned heads at every occasion. Madam Patricia, the owner, had a reputation for her magic hands that could transform even the most unruly hair into perfection. But there was one thing about her salon that raised concerns. There was a law: no mirror is allowed into her salon. There were no mirrors. Not a single one. Customers couldn't see themselves while their hair was being styled. No handheld mirrors, no reflective surfaces, nothing. At first, people didn't think much of it. They waved it up to Madam Patricia being eccentric or simply different. After all, her work spoke for itself, and clients left her shop feeling beautiful and confident. One other thing that made her salon unique is the way she makes hairs very fast. Hair that will ordinarily take other salon a whole day to make only takes Madam Patricia 1 hour. So her salon was more preferred to other. But as time went on, whispers began to spread. Why were there no mirrors? Was there a reason? Was it just a strange rule, or was there something more to it? No one dared to ask Madam Patricia directly, though. She was polite but distant, a woman of few words. And when someone did bring it up, she would smile faintly and say, "Mirrors distract. I'd rather focus on your beauty than reflections." Madam Patricia's salon was the pride of Makurdi town. From early morning to late evening, it was always busy. Women always sit down patiently, waiting their turn while laughing and chatting about the latest gossip. They always wait patiently because they knew that once it is their turn they are going to leave with nothing short of a beautifully styled hair and wide smiles, each one a living testament to Madam Patricia's unmatched skill. Madam Patricia was not just a hairdresser, she was an artist. Whether it was intricate braids, smooth cornrows, or bold cuts, her hands seemed to work magic. Customers often said she didn't just style their hair, she made them feel beautiful in ways they couldn't explain. But for all her talent, Madam Patricia remained a mystery. She was soft-spoken, elegant, and polite, yet there was something about her that kept people from getting too close. She lived alone, never joined the town gatherings, and rarely engaged in idle chatter. The only time people saw her smile was in her salon, but even that smile carried a weight that no one could place. Her salon's no mirror rule became the talk of the town. At first, customers shrugged it off, trusting Madam Patricia's skill to work without their input. But as time passed, the rule started to feel strange. A woman once joked, "Does she think we'll criticize her work if we see ourselves?" But another quickly replied, "Or maybe she doesn't want us to see what's behind us." The group laughed nervously, but the thought lingered. One day, as Madam Patricia braided a customer's hair, the woman, clearly uneasy, asked, "Madam Patricia, why don't you have mirrors here? Don't you think it's a little unusual?" Madam Patricia paused briefly, her hands never missing a beat. Then, with a calm smile, she said, "I don't want distractions, I want to focus." It was an answer that satisfied no one. But no one pressed further, either. Her customers loved her work too much to risk upsetting her. Still, the whispers grew louder, especially among those who had never stepped into the salon. What was Madam Patricia hiding? Madam Patricia hadn't always been the mysterious woman that everyone knew in the neighborhood. Years ago, she was just a young girl with dreams. She grew up in the neighboring town of Umubi, where her grandmother, Mama Amarachi, was known as the best hairdresser for many years. Her grandmother, Mama Amarachi, wasn't just a hairdresser, she was a healer of sorts. Women came to her not just for hair but for advice, blessings, and sometimes, answers to problems they couldn't share with anyone else. Madam Patricia, then called Patricia, spent her childhood watching her grandmother work. She marveled at how Mama Amarachi's hands seemed to bring life to every strand of hair they touched. But there was one thing about Mama Amarachi that puzzled young Patricia, her strict rule about mirrors. The small, round mirror that hung in the corner of the salon was always covered with a piece of cloth. When Patricia asked why, her grandmother would only say, "Mirrors see things we don't." Never let vanity overshadow the power of a woman's spirit. Remember that. When Mama Amarachi passed away, she left everything to Patricia, the salon, her tools, and an old, intricately designed comb. It was a beautiful object, carved from wood and adorned with tiny symbols Patricia couldn't understand. Along with it came a final piece of advice: use this comb wisely, and never uncover a mirror in your salon. At first, Patricia didn't think much of it. But as she started her own salon in Makurdi and followed her grandmother's traditions, strange things began to happen. Customers often commented on how they felt different in her salon, lighter, more confident, even peaceful. And though she couldn't explain it, Patricia noticed that her work seemed effortless when she used the comb. But there were moments she couldn't ignore. Sometimes, when she worked late into the night, she felt a presence behind her. Other times, she thought she saw shadows move in the corner of her eye. She remembered her grandmother's words and made sure to keep mirrors out of the salon. But deep down, she wondered if the comb, and whatever power it carried, was the reason for these strange occurrences. In the neighborhood, no one was more curious about Madam Patricia's salon than Angela. Angela had a reputation for sticking her nose where it didn't belong. She loved gossip and thrived on uncovering secrets. To her, the no mirror rule was a puzzle begging to be solved. "I'll find out what that woman is hiding," she declared to anyone who would listen. Then there was Charles, a reporter from the city who had recently moved to Makurdi. He had heard about Madam Patricia's salon from the locals and was intrigued. To him, the story of the Nomia salon sounded like the perfect piece for his newspaper. But the more he dug into the rumors, the more he began to suspect there was more to Madam Patricia than met the eye. And finally, there was Cynthia. Cynthia was a no-nonsense woman who didn't believe in superstitions or town gossip. She had recently moved back to Makurdi after years in the city and decided to visit Madam Patricia's salon out of curiosity. But Cynthia wasn't one to follow rules blindly. When she learned about the Nomia rule, she scoffed and said, "It's just hair. What's the big deal?" What none of them knew was that their curiosity would soon lead to events that would change the town forever. It didn't take long for the whispers about Madam Patricia's salon to grow louder. Customers began noticing strange things that were hard to explain. One day, a young woman named Ifeoma, curious about the Nomia rule, decided to sneak a compact mirror into her bag. As Madam Patricia worked on her hair, Ifeoma couldn't resist pulling it out for a quick glance. But what she saw made her freeze. It wasn't her reflection looking back at her, but it wasn't. The eyes in the mirror seemed alive, almost as if her reflection was watching her. She quickly shoved the mirror back into her bag, her heart racing. Another customer swore she saw the scissors on the table move on their own when Madam Patricia wasn't looking. A soft gust of wind swept through the room, yet no windows were open. These small, inexplicable moments began to stack up, each one adding fuel to the growing fire of suspicion. Angela, ever the instigator, couldn't help but fan the flames. She whispered to anyone who would listen, "Do you think it's normal for one woman to have so much success?" She made a pact with the spirits. That's why her salon is always full. Her word spread like wildfire, and soon, even the most loyal customers began to wonder if there was some truth to her claims. But it was Cynthia who truly set things in motion. Cynthia had always been skeptical of the town's superstitions, and Madam Patricia's salon was no exception. "Rules are for people who don't know better," she told herself as she slipped a small mirror into her purse before heading to the salon. When she arrived, Madam Patricia greeted her warmly, as always. Cynthia sat in the chair, confident and unbothered, as Madam Patricia began braiding her hair. As the minutes passed, Cynthia couldn't resist her curiosity. She casually reached into her bag, pulled out the mirror, and held it up. The scream that followed could be heard from outside the salon. Madam Patricia stopped mid-braid, startled, as Cynthia dropped the mirror onto the floor. Her hands trembled as she pointed at it, unable to form words. The mirror hadn't just shown her reflection, it had shown something else. A dark, shadowy figure loomed behind Madam Patricia, its form unclear but its presence unmistakable. Madam Patricia's face darkened. She bent down, picked up the mirror, and placed it on the table, her movements slow and deliberate. "Cynthia," she said softly, her voice calm but firm, "this is why I have rules." Cynthia, still shaking, grabbed her bag and left without saying another word. By the next morning, the story of her encounter had spread across the town. Charles, always looking for a story, knew this was something he couldn't ignore. He began asking questions, speaking to customers and others who claimed to know the truth about Madam Patricia's salon. "There's an old legend," one elder told him. "They say mirrors are dangerous. They are portals. Spirits can move through them, especially restless ones." Another person added, "Did you know Madam Patricia's grandmother was special? They say she wasn't just a hairdresser, she was a seer. People came to her not just for beauty, but for protection." Intrigued, Charles dug deeper. He uncovered a story about Madam Patricia's grandmother, Mama Amarachi. Decades ago, a powerful, vengeful spirit had terrorized their town. Mama Amarachi had trapped the spirit inside a mirror, using a ritual that involved the antique comb now owned by Madam Patricia. The mirror had been sealed and buried, and Mama Amarachi had warned that no mirrors should ever be uncovered near the site of the old ritual. Charles pieced it together. The salon was built on cursed land. Madam Patricia's grandmother had contained the spirit, but the power of the comb, and the absence of mirrors, was what kept it from escaping. Charles couldn't keep this to himself. He decided to confront Madam Patricia directly. When he entered the salon late one evening, he found her alone, cleaning up for the day. She looked up and sighed as if she had been expecting him. "You've been asking questions," she said, her voice calm but tired. Charles nodded. "I need to know the truth." Madam Patricia sat down, her hands folded in her lap. After a long pause, she began to speak. "This salon. It's more than a place for beauty. It's a responsibility. My grandmother left me the comb and the warnings that came with it. This land was cursed long ago, and the comb. It holds the spirit at bay. The no mirror rule isn't just a superstition. Mirrors give it a way to escape. They reflect more than what we see." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "If the spirit is released, it will destroy everything. That's why I followed the rules, even when people question me. I've done everything to keep this town safe." Charles listened in stunned silence. He believed her, though he didn't want to admit it. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. But not everyone in the town was willing to accept Madam Patricia's explanations. Angela, determined to prove her rumors true, rallied a group of people. If she has nothing to hide, then why does she avoid mirrors? She asked. We'll bring our own and see for ourselves. Late one night, they stormed the salon, armed with handheld mirrors and lanterns. They broke the door open and placed the mirrors around the room, convinced they were exposing a fraud. At first, nothing happened. The people laughed nervously, their confidence growing. But then, one by one, the mirrors began to crack. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the salon as the room grew cold. Madam Patricia arrived just as the final mirror broke. She stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale. What have you done? She whispered. Before anyone could answer, the air grew heavy, and a chilling wind swept through the salon. The lanterns flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. And then, from the shattered mirrors, a presence began to emerge. The salon was unrecognizable. Shattered mirrors lay scattered across the floor, and a deep, guttural sound echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Madam Patricia stood at the doorway, her hands clutching the antique comb so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew what had to be done, but she also knew the price it could demand. Charles, she called out, her voice firm but desperate. I need your help. Go to the market and find these herbs, ojuresai leaves, bitter kola, and a calabash of palm oil. Quickly. Charles hesitated for a moment, his usual confidence replaced by fear. But the determination in Madam Patricia's eyes left no room for argument. He nodded and ran into the night. Cynthia, who had followed Madam Patricia back to the salon, stepped forward. What can I do? She asked, her voice trembling. Madam Patricia handed her a small pouch. Scatter this powder around the salon. It's ash from sacred wood, my grandmother prepared it for moments like this. It will keep the spirit from spreading beyond these walls. As Cynthia hurried to follow the instructions, Madam Patricia stepped into the salon. The shadows danced around her, and a cold voice filled the room, low and menacing. You dared to cage me again. It hissed. Madam Patricia closed her eyes, whispering the words her grandmother had taught her long ago. The comb in her hand began to glow faintly, its intricate carvings pulsating with energy. By the time Charles returned, the room was a battlefield. The spirit had begun to manifest, a swirling mass of darkness, eyes glowing like embers, filling the salon with an unearthly roar. Charles placed the herbs and palm oil in front of Madam Patricia, his hands shaking. With precise movements, she combined the ingredients into a thick paste, smearing it onto the comb. This is our only chance, she said, more to herself than to the others. It has to work. She stepped forward, holding the comb high. I command you, she shouted, her voice echoing with authority, return to where you came from. The spirit lunged toward her, its form twisting and writhing. But the comb's glow intensified, and with a final burst of light, the spirit let out a deafening scream, its presence pulled back into the comb. The room fell silent. For a moment, everything was still. Madam Patricia stood frozen, the comb now dim and cool in her hand. Then, her knees buckled, and she collapsed. Madam Patricia. Charles and Cynthia rushed to her side, gently lowering her to the floor. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. The people, who had gathered outside the salon, cautiously entered. Their faces were a mix of fear and guilt as they took in the scene, the shattered mirrors, the glowing comb, and Madam Patricia, lying unconscious on the floor. Angela, tears streaming down her face, stepped forward. We didn't know, she whispered. We thought you were hiding something from us, but we didn't understand. Charles turned to the crowd, his voice sharp. And now you do. Madam Patricia wasn't hiding anything for herself. She was protecting all of you. Your curiosity nearly destroyed everything. One by one, the people murmured their apologies, their voices heavy with regret. They helped clean up the salon, sweeping away the broken glass and placing protective charms as Madam Patricia had instructed. It was their way of making amends, even if it felt like too little, too late. Madam Patricia woke up the next morning in her home, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. Cynthia and Charles had stayed by her side, ensuring she was cared for. You should rest, Cynthia said, handing her a bowl of pepper soup. Madam Patricia smiled faintly. Rest can wait. There's work to do. Within a week, the salon reopened, but this time, it was different. Madam Patricia had installed small, handmade charms around the room, tokens of protection, crafted from the herbs and ash she had used during the ritual. The no mirror rule remained, and not a single person questioned it. Instead, they respected it, understanding now that some traditions were rooted in wisdom far beyond their own. Charles became a regular at the salon, though not for the hairstyles. He was drawn to Madam Patricia's stories, eager to learn more about the history of her grandmother and the sacrifices she had made. Cynthia, too, became a close confidant, her skepticism replaced by admiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Madam Patricia sat alone in the salon. The antique comb rested on the table before her, its surface polished to a soft gleam. She traced the carvings with her fingers, her expression thoughtful. "Grandmother," she whispered, "I hope I've made you proud." She picked up the comb and carefully placed it in a locked drawer, her movements slow and deliberate. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking back at the room. "Some secrets," she murmured, "are better left untold." The salon lights flickered off, leaving the room bathed in quiet darkness. And so, the story of Madam Patricia's salon became a whispered legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that some mysteries are best respected, not unraveled. Imagine living in Makurdi town and hearing whispers about Madam Patricia's salon. If you were there, would you have followed her rules? Or would your curiosity have led you to challenge the mystery? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more captivating African folktales, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Share this video with your friends and family. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.